Right, Peter Dunworth. It's our first ever podcast in Australia. Bring the mic up. You want to bet about a fist?
How's that?
That's good, man. This is our first ever podcast down under.
It's a pleasure to be here.
My first trip to Australia.
How are you finding it?
Mate, I'm sitting with someone from the esteemed Dunworth family. So your brother, are we going to see your brother?
Yeah, tomorrow night.
Right. So I've met a lot of people in this job.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, you probably get called it the same, Dunny. Michael's my favorite person I've ever met in Bitcoin. Hands down.
Mm-hmm.
No competition.
Thanks, mate.
Sorry. Well, you're like different now. You're like my best friend in Bitcoin. You know what I mean? He's, firstly, we don't really talk about Bitcoin when I hang out with him. It's like hanging out with a mate. And he's always happy.
Yep.
Always happy.
Scarily so, right?
Yeah, I can't wait to see him. Hope he doesn't get an ego off this. But I love your brother.
Everyone does.
He doesn't talk about you.
Why would you? If
You know, I didn't know you had a brother. But thank you for having us here in Australia.
We're thrilled you're here, literally.
And Danny was like, last night, he's like, I need to get Peter to tell you a story, but I can't tell you what it's about. But you got to give, and then I've got my notes. It's like shark story.
You told us when we were playing golf, and it's too crazy. You got to share it.
It is. It sounds unbelievable. So I'll tell you the full story. It's many moons ago, in what feels like another life, I was training for a paddleboard race in Hawaii, which was a 52K race between islands on one of those boards that you paddle on your knees with your hands digging in. So one of the training runs that I'd do for that race was jumping off North Bondi, probably our most famous beach, and it faces dead south, and there's a point about 8 kilometres in the distance. And so I'd paddle down there, paddle back, and it'd take about 3 hours to do. But one morning, mid-May morning, I'd do it by myself, just straight offshore, and be about 2 Ks offshore at some points in this journey, and got down to the point, Malabar Point, and I'm about 1 K off the beach, sitting there by myself. It's probably 7:30 in the morning at the time, and sitting on the board having a water before I turn around and head back, and probably no more than maybe a metre further back than you are now, so 3 metres in front of me, I see this little, a big fish about 1 foot long, like scampering across the top of the water, and I'm like, that's odd. And then from underneath it, I just see this probably 12 to 13 foot great white come up and smash it, just eat it straight in front of me. And it throws water in the air. I'm sitting on my board. The water that its fin throws in the air lands on my board in front of me. I get goosebumps telling this story. And I basically shit myself.
Yeah, of course.
And the advice is, if you see a shark out there, just don't move. It won't eat you. And it's like, pardon the French, but fuck that. Die trying. Like, I'm going to shore. I don't care if it eats me. So I turn straight for shore, and the problem is I know my distances and how far or fast I paddle, and I know I've got a 6-minute paddle to the beach going flat stick. So I'm like, if it wants me, I'm gone. Like it is. So I start paddling the beach. The adrenaline's going. It's going now, actually, telling the story, and start paddling, and I see this shimmer of wind come across from maybe 30 metres across, and just as it gets to me, I look down under the board, and there is like this enormous shark swimming at pace about 20 foot underneath me, and I'm like, oh my God, like just pretend it's not there, and so 3 minutes in, I'm halfway to the beach. That's how far off I am, and adrenaline doesn't last more than 3 minutes, so basically I'm not that fit to keep going, so I'm like, sort of I reassess things, and when the adrenaline wears off, you're prone to making really dumb choices. So I'm presented with getting out, keep going, get out at the beach, but that's going to upset the whole day that I've got planned in front of me. So I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to turn around. The quickest thing to do is just paddle back. Maybe I didn't see what I thought I did. So I turn right, start paddling north again, and I'm paddling for 45 minutes in the water, and as I'm paddling, I get to Coogee, and then there's an island about 1 K off Coogee, and to put this into perspective, I'm nearly another K outside that. So I'm now 2 Ks from shore, not 500 metres. And as I'm paddling along, I have this awful sensation of when I pull through the water, it stops feeling like water and it starts feeling like concrete. The water turns hard and it feels like the water's being pushed forwards. And I'm like, that's hopefully not what I think it is, basically a big shark coming up to look at me and turning around. So I felt this maybe 3 or 4 times in the space of 5 minutes. And then I thought we're all good and I'm still paddling and focused and I'm still trying to get back to Bondi, when literally probably close to a 30 to 40 centimetre dorsal fin pops up like within 1.5 meters next to me.
You were stalked.
Literally stalked.
You were
and
stalked.
So I am just literally looking at this thing and my immediate response is, oh, this is a prank. One of my mates has played on me. They've swum out with a fin on the back because it looks so ridiculously huge. And then I looked around, I'm like 2 Ks offshore. My friends aren't up for that for a prank. But so I immediately go into meltdown. I literally piss myself. I do a deal with God. Like, you let me out of this one and, I promise to be a better person. And I watch this thing literally the fin just slowly come down under the water as I stop paddling and I watch it go away. There's an immediate sigh of relief that, okay, this is no longer here. But then the realisation dawns on you that now you don't know where it is. Mm-hmm. So having seen that for the second time, I took the hint and then I proceeded to go straight into shore. No looking, no stopping, just a 20-minute paddle straight back to the beach, and I haven't been offshore since. So,
yeah. Oh really? You're done with the water?
I did the race in Hawaii, but no more. No, like I don't surf anymore. Done with all of it.
I mean, me and Danny talk about this a lot because how often do you go surfing?
2 or 3 times a week, probably.
Yeah. And every time I hope he gets eaten by a shark. No, I'm joking. Like every time I see about a shark attack in Australia, which isn't, I mean, it's more than once a year, I feel like.
It's more than once a year.
I'm always like, shit. Like, are you all right, Danny?
There's a lot of people that surf here, though.
I don't care about the odds. Like, there's zero chance I'm getting in the water off Australia at all. I'll go in a swimming pool. That's fine. But you do it. You don't worry at all.
No, I don't think I don't know if I've ever seen a shark. There was one time, because you do question it, don't you?
Totally.
And there was one time I was surfing and I was paddling out and I duck dive a wave, and I thought I saw like a shadow kind of go across the wave, and it can like play tricks on you. So I'm not convinced it was a shark, but it was enough to make me think, fuck, that might have been. Paddled in, went to the lifeguard, and because I thought there's a load of people out there surfing, I'll just say, I think I might have seen this. I don't know. I was trying to like play it down. I was like, I don't know if I saw it, but I think I may have done. And he was like, it is the ocean. I was like, oh, brilliant. Cheers. Now I feel like a dickhead.
Well, that's my like. Surely they're there all the time.
Yeah.
Like, and the great whites are quite regular.
Yeah.
More down here than where I am. You get bull sharks up where I am. I don't think there's as many great whites as here.
No. A great white will happily eat a human, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
In one bite.
Easily. Or at least put a big dent on you. So
I still can't believe you went back out.
Yeah, that was crazy. And in hindsight, like I just put it down to the adrenaline making bad decisions. Like that's just bad risk management. But the reason why I was so doubtful of seeing it, we talk about in Bitcoin black swan events.
Yeah.
Prior to that, there hadn't been a shark attack in Sydney in 73 years.
Oh, is
so
that
I'm
true?
thinking, well, that didn't happen. Like it never did. And then that was in May, probably 15 years ago nearly. And then in September, there was a shark attack in Bondi. Then there was another one in November in Avalon. And then Woolloomooloo was in between that. So 6 months after that happened to me personally, we then saw 3 shark attacks in Sydney, like within 30 Ks of each other.
Is there a reason why they're becoming more regular?
There's loads of like theories, but I don't know. But
Global warming.
That is what some people say. Driving like depleting fish stocks, driving them closer to shore and all that sort of stuff. Where I am in Queensland, there's been one shark attack again. I don't know, it was like since the 70s or something, which was really recently actually. Yeah. But just south, so where I surf on like the Gold Coast, maybe 40 minutes south, maybe a little further, there's a place called Ballina. So it's only just over the border. It's probably like shark attack capital Australia now. And for whatever reason, they just don't like Queensland.
Don't you get crocodiles in the sea here as well?
Yeah, way further north though. Not really where anyone surfs.
No. But that's also weird, crocodiles in the ocean.
Yeah.
Crocs, sharks. This country's weird. You've got a lot of weird shit here.
Drop bears.
Yeah.
What's a drop
bear?
bear?
Look out for them. Danger.
Oh, is that the koalas with chlamydia?
I mean, they do all have chlamydia, yeah.
And so what, they just jump out the trees at you? Yeah. Have you had that happen?
No.
Done a lot of
They did-
camping, not
Is
yet.
this a wind up? Is it Strawberry wind up?
Yeah, it's all the Australians tell tourists.
I believed you last night. Well, I'm glad to be here. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to see a spider in my hotel room. Safe, really?
I mean, yeah, it's a spider. They go
No,
everywhere.
but like not the.
Not the ones that'll kill you?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Maybe
no, there's none of that. They do a good job with fumigating. So
Do you have any weird stuff here in Sydney?
Oh, there's snakes.
funnel web spiders, they're the most dangerous spider on earth. They can kill you if you don't get it treated. But
And-
you'll know it. They'll jump on you. They can jump about a foot. So
But
That's true.
actually
That
a
one's
true
real.
story.
could there be one in here? Realistically, you're
There could
screw
be.
you. You're a wind up. Could I? Should I be checking under my toilet
Yeah,
and in my boots?
yeah. You need to check. Yeah, check your shoes. Check under the bed.
You're a wind up. You can fuck off. Weird country. I'm not coming back. But no, I'm glad to be here. I'm looking forward to seeing your brother. Glad to talk to you.
yeah.
Look forward to getting some good food in. Before we start, tell me about Bitcoin here in Australia. Like how active is it? How big is the scene? I've got no concept. I can conceptualize it in other places, but Australia I can't, it's too far away.
Well, I think it's difficult to get a grasp of even being here because it's such a geographically dispersed country. You know, we've got, the equivalent of, Sydney to Perth, which is the width of the country, is the equivalent of driving from London to Moscow, just about. So,
Wow, okay.
and we're not a big country. There's only 25 million of us, so there's not a lot of people here to start with. And typically geographically dispersed across that size, you just don't really know, but there are some really great communities that, we're all a part of, which I think bring a lot of Bitcoiners together, because a common theme I see with Bitcoiners, probably across the globe and maybe more so here, is there's a sense of isolation, because to be in Bitcoin, you have to be maybe a little bit
Mental.
or on the spectrum
Yeah.
or, God knows what, but, you're not, traditional thinking to get into this space. So
Yeah.
there's that sense of isolation, but there are some really great communities that, I've been fortunate to be a part of. There's a great initiative called the Bitcoin Bush Bash, which Wiz and Sir William basically put on, and basically, maybe 80 to 100 Bitcoiners from all over the country converge on a quiet little country town and have 3 days of talking about Bitcoin, which seems so surreal. Like
Out in the bush.
literally out in the bush, little community town hall, usually next to a church, and there'll be 80 to 100 adults sitting down listening to Bitcoin presentations, and then afterwards we go to the pub and have a steak dinner and basically chat all night about Bitcoin, and then we go back to our lives 2 or 3 days later. So
By the way, Danny, there's a bit of fluff up there hanging off the ceiling. I just had a moment out of the corner where I was like, what the fuck's that? I hate bugs. What's the government treatment of Bitcoin here?
there have been mixed messages, to
Okay.
tell you the truth. We just had recent legislation, a proposed bill pushed down. So basically got kiboshed, and that was going to make that put Bitcoin and crypto into the same bucket and make it a financial product. But ASIC, which is our regulator or the equivalent of the SEC, has deemed that Bitcoin is not a financial product. So there is no regulatory requirement or licensing required to talk about or give advice on Bitcoin in Australia. So I think that's probably a good thing. The more people that are aware of it, the better. And I think obviously the news with BlackRock, that will then push Bitcoin into that financial mainstream. So I'll be curious to see how the regulators and the government responds to it. But the ATO as well, they've been pretty fair with it. They deem that it's a property, so it's the same tax treatment as buying and selling shares or a property.
ATL,
The Australian Tax Office, sorry.
I was like alcohol,
Yeah.
tobacco, liquor. Okay.
Yep. So our tax office has a pretty fair treatment of it.
Okay, so it sounds similar-ish to the UK.
Yep.
What about the banks? Are the banks allowing people to send money to exchanges to buy Bitcoin? Because that's the big issue we have in the UK. The banks are, just routinely closing down people's accounts if they're trying to buy Bitcoin.
I have got a lot of war stories on this.
Okay.
And I've seen it get progressively worse in
Okay.
the last, say, 3 to 6 months. So we've been doing this for a number of years now, and it's only the last sort of 2 to 3 months I've seen just how difficult it is to get money into banks. We've seen our major bank, the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, which is, a large bank, even on global terms, they've limited the amount of money that you can transfer to the exchange to the tune of $10,000 a month, which is it's a big hit. So they don't want to see money moved to the bank or out of the system. And I've got a theory on why they don't want this, because maybe a bit of background of this is after the GFC, the global banks basically put together a regulatory framework called the Basel III Accords, which were put together. And it was basically to ensure that the banks had sufficient capital to fulfill all of their liquidity obligations. And this meant, from a lending perspective, if you wanted to lend out $1 million on the home loan front, you had to have 5% in cash on the balance sheet. And that basically worked into a $50,000 amount, which in Australian terms, that's roughly one Bitcoin, give or take 20%. Now, if you take that $50,000 out of the banking system to send it to the exchange to buy a Bitcoin, and then that money is outside the system, that $50,000 can't be rehypothecated 20 times to produce $1 million loan. And that $1 million loan, from the bank's perspective, if they're working on a 2% margin, generates $20,000 of revenue for the bank per annum. And this is an ongoing annuity for the bank. So they look at this and they think, wow, if we're going to see this flight of capital out of our system into the Bitcoin world, this is a huge event from a credit deflation perspective, because it inhibits their ability to lend money.
They should just sell the Bitcoin.
They should. And then they should bring that into the system.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, and this is the world's converging, that I think what will happen over the next sort of 6 to 7 years. But at the moment, they're very anti-Bitcoin, but I think they'll soon embrace it and put that on the balance sheet, because once it's on the balance sheet, then they can 20x leverage it, and you can see where that lending goes.
See, I'm not sure if that's the reason, or it's a similar reason that's happening in the UK. One thing I do know, which is a problem for the banks, and one of the reasons they don't want to touch Bitcoin or Bitcoin exchanges, is that the UK government essentially outsourced financial surveillance to the banks.
Yeah.
They essentially went, well, you can just do this job for us. You can handle all the KYC, AML, yada, yada. And because there have historically been issues with, and we just have to say broad crypto, because even if you regulate Bitcoin as a commodity and crypto as financial products, people are buying them from similar places. So the actual AML, KYC situation is very similar. But because they have to handle all of the financial surveillance for the government, I think a lot of them are like, there's just too many headaches with this. We don't need this headache in our world. We're just going to ban it. And it's even worse. I was speaking to, I don't know if you were there when we had the conversation with Danny from Coin Corner.
In London?
It might have been after that. So Danny Scott, who runs Coin Corner, which is an Isle of Man, essentially UK exchange, he was now saying that something along the lines of, if there is a criminal transaction or a transaction that's got through your KYC AML checks, you are liable up to 1 hop or maybe 2 hops. Something along the lines of this. Yeah. Therefore, it's just making the banks go, well, we don't make any money from this. It's high risk. And we have a liability if this is a criminal transaction. Yeah. Why do it?
Correct. There's nothing in it for them.
There's nothing in it for them.
Show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome.
Exactly.
We're earning no money.
Yeah.
In fact, when we see the money leave, we really earn no money on that. And there's no outcome for us other than liability. So it's really a risk mitigation.
Yeah, I don't think it's like this weird conspiracy where the banks have got together and said, you know what, this Bitcoin stuff, this is a threat to us. We need to get together and agree to. No. I think it's purely the incentives, because we do have, like, Revolut are pretty good. Yeah. Revolut said, we're going to be the modern bank. We're going to allow this. And I've had zero issues moving money in and out of exchanges from Revolut. But I do know across the major banks, your NatWest, your Barclays, I don't want to name all in case I get some of them wrong. I'm not so sure on Lloyds, but most of them are basically, you can't, and they won't allow it. And some will close down your bank accounts. I actually had weirdly enough, I had a bank account closed down because I got a sponsor payment from a crypto exchange, from Gemini. This is where it gets super weird. So send them an invoice, Gemini go to pay the invoice, the payment gets blocked, and I'm asked to provide a copy of, I don't know if I've told you this, the invoice and the contract.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, what the fuck? What do you mean you want the contract? So I have to send it. They've seen the contract, and they immediately froze my personal and business accounts, froze my money, and then closed the accounts and said, your money's frozen for this period of time. And I hadn't broken a rule. Their rule said you cannot transfer money to exchanges, but they banned me because I had a relationship with an exchange, which is super weird.
Yeah. This is the problem, I think, that's not just a problem with our banking system, but it feels like broader society.
Yes.
That there is an overreach for government at all points. And the thing I love about British law is that there is, you gave us the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. But in that instance and many more, there is not that ability to do that. And I think that is a massive overreach that is a step too far. And this is where, one of the things that excites me about Bitcoin is that, self-sovereignty, that you can have full control and ownership over your movements and what you want to do with it. Now, that's not an endorsement to, flaunt the rules and the rest of it. It's anything but I do like the idea that I don't have to ask anyone what I want to do with my money, because I find it highly intrusive, if not offensive.
Well, again, that's what happened to me with Lloyd's.
Yeah.
So I'd been with Lloyd's for 25 years, right? I'd had multiple products from them, mortgages, loans, everything paid off. Wasn't in my overdraft. I was a good customer. I get a phone call one day from somebody in a call center, which, by the way, let me dig out this email. This will be interesting for you, Danny, because this backs up what happened to me. So I got this phone call from somebody in a call center that said, hi, Mr. McCormack, we're just doing an account review. We just want to run through some of your transactions with you. I was like, okay, yeah, what's that? And they said, this money on this date, you sent it here. What's it for? And I was like, do I have to tell you? And they said, no. I was like, well, I'm not going to tell you. Have I done something wrong? If you're suspicious, should you not call the police? Should you not investigate me? I'm an adult with 2 kids and 3 businesses. I'm okay. I've not complained about this transaction. Anyway, 2 days later, I get a letter in the post, your account's being closed down.
Yeah.
And my big issue, there's 2 issues with this. Firstly is the fact that they're being nosy. It's like they're asking me private information.
Mind your own business.
But the second point is, who is this person that I'm sharing this information with? I got this email, Danny. I want to dig it out. I bet I won't find it now. This guy, he was working for a UK bank, and he was working on essentially the team that kind of phoned me. I heard your story with Lloyd's. I worked in that team. He said I was a junior. I think he said he was something like in his early 20s, and he was having to make these phone calls, and he was given the authority and responsibility to close down people's accounts.
Yeah.
And he was a junior.
Crazy.
Yeah. And it's like, what is going on here?
Yeah. We've had similar things here. I've been forwarded from clients. One of our major banks, top 4 bank here, probably similar to Lloyd's in status from an Australian perspective. There were 14 different questions that their banker asked them on a $200,000 transfer to one of our exchanges here. And the transfer wasn't anything out of the ordinary. There were millions of dollars of transfer to this exchange prior, and there was a list of 14 questions. Who is, basically, where is this money going? Who is the intended recipient? What is the purpose of this? What is the purpose of your business? Like, I am talking a list, and client forwarded it to me and said, oh, can you have a look at this? By the way, we're not going to get you to respond to it. We've asked our accountant to do it. But it was a proper list that, if you have a choice, you don't have to comply, in which case they'll do what happened to you. Or alternatively, you have a response which probably takes you close to an hour to answer the questions in full to a fairly meaningless, by way of percentage terms, transaction for this client. So there's an hour of an accountant's time to basically respond to this request. So the overreach is basically across all areas, I think. And
yeah. Well, did you hear my interview with Nigel Farage?
Yes.
Yeah. What did he say? He thinks 1 million bank accounts in the UK have been closed down arbitrarily, which to me is a huge scandal.
Yeah.
Because it's coercive pressure to comply with fitted. I mean, it kind of feels like, you don't want to say it without sounding like a conspiracy theorist.
Correct.
But at the same time, you're like, this is kind of quacking like China a little bit.
Worse so.
walks like
At
China.
least you know
quacks
what
like
the
China.
rules are over there and everyone's really clear on it, but it feels like our rules may be a little more subjective. And I'm not sure if Danny may have shared with you, but in the last week or two, we've had now the banks can filter your social media to determine whether or not they want to continue to provide service to you.
Shut the fuck up.
I didn't even know that happened.
What?
Yeah. Well, that's in the throes of coming, and I've got to say that probably is going to be shit canned pretty quickly. I would have thought, because it feels like reading the room that is a no go now, but maybe 12 months ago that was something that they wanted to institute and the rest of it. And big companies move very slowly, so it takes just a long time to get through things. But one of the last maybe 2 weeks I saw something about, I won't mention the major bank, but it's literally one of our top 4 banks suggesting that they can rescind their service to you if they're not happy with how you're presenting yourself socially or on social media.
That's so screwed up.
Yes. Yeah, it's horrible.
I think I would lose my account. I mean, it's weird because, coming into Australia, you're very conscious of the fact that if you have any criminal record, you might not be allowed in the country. They're ironically strict about that, seeing as you're an island of convicts.
Correct, right? The whole purpose of this place, Bar Adelaide, was to look after the riffraff from Britain.
You were meant to be a safe space for British convicts, but I was really conscious of that. And I was like, and I was thinking it through. I was like, have I ever actually? And I've never been arrested. No criminal record. I'm a law-abiding taxpaying citizen, and I constantly feel like I'm guilty of something.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what is the end goal here?
Yeah, I don't know. Just sow that seed of doubt. It feels like that's where we're moving to across all society, and there's some I think some interesting societal things happening in Australia where we have a National Sorry Day where
What?
a National Sorry Day to apologise to the Indigenous community for how.
I mean, it's a weird way of doing it. My cousin, she lives out in Australia, and she's
In New Zealand.
New Zealand. Fiona. Sorry, Fiona. And she's a professor and she studied whatever it is Indigenous communities, Australia, New Zealand, America, South America. And, she's rightly discussed and pointed out some of the horrendous treatment to Indigenous communities around the world. But at the same time, National Sorry Day, what's the purpose?
I don't know. And this is what without getting political, because it's, don't need that heat.
Yeah.
I genuinely don't know, but I think obviously it's about awareness. For me personally, I find, given the fact that 20% of our population are first-generation immigrants,
Okay.
what are they sorry for? Like, they just got here off a boat. Like, why should they be saying sorry for the treatment of people who weren't here previously, which, it's tough to do. But at the same time, it's really important to acknowledge that some people have been given a really tough time. So,
But you can do that with action rather than words.
there is it's just a very fine line, and this is where if there's a sense of someone who's being a victim in a situation, it's important to appease their concerns. So maybe that is what they wanted. So I'm not sure where we got to on this, but I do know it's sort of a very strange situation where, like, in my world, I say sorry for things that I've done and I do my very best to make good on it. And if someone asks me to say sorry for something I haven't done, it's very swiftly dealt with a good luck with that. So, but at the same time, we've got this situation where, we want to live in a harmonious community, and, it's important that we acknowledge that some people were treated very badly. So
I think these weird societal issues, I think there's a lot of parallels in a lot of Western liberal democracies. I think a lot of what you're probably going through here is very similar to the UK, very similar to the US, where government has got way too big, way too inefficient. There's too much corruption within government. There is a breaking financial system. There is, I don't know what inflation's like here, but it's been pretty bad in the UK. Everything's starting to fray around. I don't even want to say around the edges now. It's like creeping in towards the middle. But I am starting to feel the pushback
Yeah.
has a voice. So where the pushback before was historically, you would sound like some crazy conspiracy theorist, pushing back. I feel like the pushback has got some legs. I think a really good example was that we talked about it a few times, that Rich Men of North Virginia song in the US, which I think resonates with a lot of people at the right time. And I think what I think is going to happen is we're going to start to see pockets of this, whether it's Canada, the UK, Australia, the US, where people are starting to realize, what the fuck's going on here? I'm getting taxed here, and then I've got inflation here, and I'm left with a very, very small bit of what I've earned.
Yes.
And I can't afford anything.
It's getting smaller and smaller. And the thing that terrifies me is, for better or worse, we take our economic direction typically from the US, as does Britain, Australia, the rest of it. We're all hinged to that boat or hooked to it. The problem I see coming down the road is we've got a forecast that by before 2050, but could be 2035, which is 12 years away, 50% of US GDP is going to be generated by the government, which I find to be an oxymoron, because how can a government generate GDP? All they do is take taxes and then distribute. So, I mean, you're sitting here scratching your head thinking that's how big the government's going to get, that 50% of all expenditure in the economy is going to be from the government. Like, surely there is a better way. It needs to be more efficient. So sadly, I think this thing's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And this is where, if you look at historically the tax rates that we've had to endure across Western democracies, Australia's not isolated here, but, we've had, just after wartime and the rest of it, tax rates up to close to 90%. So, I mean, can you imagine, like, in Australia, we're sort of running around at sort of 50% tax rates, but then we also have, we've got sales tax and a whole host of things. And here's probably the most egregious example I know of, is that a litre of petrol in Australia, which for our American friends would be a quarter of a gallon, roughly, is $2 at the pump. But if you're on the highest tax rate, that $2 of petrol, how much is actually going to tax and how much is going to you personally in the form of petrol? Breaking down those taxes, once you strip all the taxes out of it, including your income tax from this, you end up with 35 cents worth of petrol out of that $2.
Alistair Milne did a really good tweet recently. He said, you start a business and you pay corporation tax, and then you pay yourself and you pay income tax. And then what you're left with, you buy stuff and you pay sales tax. And then you die and you pay death tax.
Yeah.
And it was a much longer list, but you went through and you try and figure out, you go, well, what am I actually left with here?
Yeah.
Like, this is fucking ridiculous. And look, I'm not an anti-tax person. I'm not a no-government person, but I am an anti-big government and anti-high tax. And, this place, but I think you try and dig out that Lenin quote, which it wasn't actually from Lenin, but it's that place between taxation and inflation. I think it came out from an interview he did with Mises. Is it with Mises?
I don't know who it was with. I don't think it was even.
He didn't even say it, but like, it's a great. The way to crush the bourgeoisie is to grind them between the millstone of taxation and inflation. Like, that's happening now
as we speak.
Yeah, that is happening.
Like
now.
In Britain, you guys are dealing with inflation, which is horrible. In addition to that, your interest rates are probably well below where they really should be. So when you're, the grill and the missiles, like in the middle of that, like you were just getting ground down to the day.
Yeah, it's not good. And nobody seems to become. It's funny when they discuss the how do we solve this? Let's raise interest rates. There's no part of the conversation which is maybe we should just reduce government expenditure.
Not even in the question, is it?
Well, I mean, in fairness to what was her name?
Who do you mean?
The Prime Minister. She lasted about 30 days.
Oh, Liz Truss.
Liz Truss.
Okay.
She actually tried to stimulate the economy. She wanted to reduce tax, and she got destroyed. But I would be quite the fan of, I'm not going to vote in the next election because they're all fucking idiots. But I'd be quite the fan of somebody to come and say, yeah, we're going to reduce government by half.
Yeah.
And we're going to reduce taxation. And we're going to put more money into your pockets to invest and create jobs. I'd be quite a fan of that.
This is the problem we have when 50% of GDP is from the government. You can't vote for that because you'll never get in, because 75% of the population is on the teat of government. And so we are fast approaching that precipitous cliff that we don't get a choice in that. And I would be a fan of that because I think we've, what's so far removed from society at the moment is positive incentive structures.
Yep.
And this is where show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. Well, of course you're incentivized to do a whole host of things like not work, take the dole, get government benefits. That gives you cheap housing. You don't have to work. An example in Australia here is, you don't have to work. You don't have to, you can get government housing. You can get government payment on a weekly basis. And you can get that from the age of 16 or 18 upwards. And if you have a child young, you'll have potentially a $5,000 baby bonus for having a child. So you're incentivized to then create those outcomes in the economy.
I love how they will say, though, the government is giving you this 5,000.
It's not.
The government's so nice. The government don't fucking generate any money.
Correct. And then you contrast that type of incentive structure to, say, Orban is it Orban in Hungary?
Yeah, Orban, yeah.
Where he said, you have 4 kids, you're tax-free for life. I'm like, if Rupert Murdoch was a resident in Hungary, I'm pretty sure he'd find a young wife and he'd be having 4 kids to meet whatever his tax-free requirement is for the rest of his life. So it's just, that's probably such a horrible conversation, but at every level we have the incentives are misaligned and it's so critical. And this is, one of the things I love about Bitcoin is it feels like in that environment, everyone's incentives are aligned. And this is where, to Bitcoin's point, I haven't seen anything that has the ability to align 8 billion people's incentives other than Bitcoin.
Well, we're going to come to that because Danny said you're the most bullish guy in Bitcoin. We're going to come to that. I just want to end, though, that point is like 50% of GDP generated by the government, which obviously is bullshit. But look, we know how this plays out. We have case study after case study. We see what Chavez did to Venezuela. Yeah. When I think they ended up with 70% of people working for government. Yeah. I've just seen it now. I've just been to Argentina. We've seen it. We've seen how this plays again. The government just gets bigger and bigger. We saw it during COVID. As they closed businesses down, as they locked everyone down and businesses were failing. No foreign government, actually the UK government expanded by 90,000 employees during COVID.
Correct.
We've seen how this all works. We've seen this over and over again. They're not generating any money. They only get money by taking it from us, the productive part of society.
Correct.
And when they push too hard, there isn't any more they can take for us, then they print and they crush us with inflation. It's times like, look, I'm not a libertarian, but I have huge sympathies with libertarians right now because we know what's going to happen. We know how this plays out. We've seen it again and again through history, yet they keep doing it.
Yeah, that's the problem. It's that there's no accountability for the decision making. And this is where if people had to sit with the decisions that they were responsible for, we'd have very different outcomes. And sadly, that's not the case. We live in a democracy where you can make bad decisions for 4 years and beat it with no consequence.
There's that time lag of what happens. It's like we've just had I got off the plane here and got a news alert from Sky, which was Birmingham City Council is effectively bankrupt.
Right.
Effectively bankrupt. And a lot of it was based on that equal pay fine. Well, actually, I saw a tweet from that Maria I really liked. She was saying they spent 100 million on a computer system upgrade that was meant to cost 19 million.
Holy shit.
Yeah, so
how much did they spend? Sorry,
100 million on a computer system.
5 times. Well,
the amount of these things that happen is like the NHS systems, all these systems that they end up doing, they cost too much money and waste of money. But the point is that effectively it's a bankrupt council now.
Yeah.
And I just think we're going to see a lot more of this. But the thing is, they can bankrupt the council because what happens? The government's going to bail them out, or
for context as well. Though this is Birmingham, it's the second biggest city in the UK. It's not.
I thought it's the third.
It's bigger than Manchester, I think. So it's not like a small council. This is like a really.
It's not like you can just relocate Birmingham residents to the next city, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like that's the problem.
It's crazy.
Yeah, I think we talked about this a long time ago. I think I was saying, like, why can't government have a budget? And if the government exceeds the budget, it triggers a referendum. Why can't that happen? If they have to print or borrow money, because they're not really borrowing it from the central bank. They're borrowing it from our future. We all know that. If people understood that, if the electorate understood, by the way, we've got an economic crisis, the government wants to borrow money, you're all going to pay for this. And everyone understood how much they were going to pay and who it affects the worst, because it actually affects the poorest the most.
Correct.
They're the ones who are killed most by inflation.
Yep.
If people really understood, and then that would trigger a referendum where we could vote on it, wouldn't that be a better form of democracy?
I like Warren Buffett's solution to this. Did you see his solution to it? Basically, if there's a budget deficit, every politician who voted for it is out, and the problem would be solved in 5 minutes. So you have a budget. If you're over and you vote for it, you're out. So
or fine them. If the budget deficit is 10%, you lose 10% of your salary.
Fair enough, but a lot of their incomes aren't.
Or a reverse incentive if they stay under it, give them a bonus.
Yeah, that creates a lot of grift though, because we're starting from such high mismanagement. So it would create a perverse incentive that you'd get people getting exceedingly rich off the back of saving money for people. I think it'd end up being like a African dictator type scenario, but it'd be our local governments that would be benefiting from it. And
that makes sense.
I think that'd lead to guillotining and riots in the streets that the people who are living with these people who are creating the grift are.
Was it Dominic Frisby who said he thinks he's not anti-taxation. I think he said about 15% feels about right.
And you look at the most successful countries on earth with that, Hong Kong, Singapore, like what Singapore's done in the last, say, 60 or 70 years, they've taken it from a backwater of Asia to a financial hub that's bigger than Switzerland. So now, tiny little island of Malaysia basically was a free port, and that's how they generated a lot of their income and sort of incentives to get people there. And then they've got a flat tax rate across all, similar to what Hong Kong was previously. And now literally it is a thriving hub up there. And so I look at this and I think, why can't we model what success looks like from a government perspective? But it's very difficult to do that when their incentives are out there and you can effectively vote for getting payment. And one thing that was sort of scary from an Australian perspective, I'm not sure what it was like globally, but in the height of COVID, 75% of our population was a net recipient from the government.
Yeah, the math doesn't work.
Correct. So that's a very short window of, that's a short timeline if you want to run a successful government or society.
But it is all breaking. I mean, yeah, but like I say, Birmingham City Council is effectively bankrupt. And I'm sure there are probably other councils in the UK that are approaching a similar situation. We've now got a school crisis at the moment. I don't know the full details of this, but essentially the concrete that has been used in the construction of not just schools, a number of buildings in the UK is found to be defective. And I don't know if it's like a time thing. Over time, it degrades. But to the point, it's dangerous now. These buildings could collapse. So something like 100 schools now, it might even be more, Danny can perhaps find out, are not opening this week because it's dangerous. Yeah. My kids' school, their school's now been closed. And my daughter won't be going to school this week. They're going to remote learning and Teams. And
more than 150.
More than 150.
Wow.
But they're having to check buildings all across here. It's not just that.
So they'll find more.
Yeah, it could be like law courts. It could be anything. Yeah. But they're in a situation now the government needs to find money to fix these schools, money they don't have. I can already tell you, because I've talked about it a million times on the show, thanks to Dan Tubb, the government spends more on debt interest than it spends on education in the UK. Yeah. Like everything is breaking. Yeah. And it's all breaking because government's too big. We should get into Bitcoin because Daddy said to me, you think Bitcoin will reach $20 billion a coin, and you think it should be $7 billion a coin now?
Today, yes.
Today. Yeah, all right.
That's a conservative figure. Come on, Pete.
The thing is like we try not to bait with our show titles. We try, we want a good show title that engages people. and they're interested in it, but we don't want to bait them.
This one's going to be pure bait.
This could be pure bait. Daddy was like, this one's going to be about value in Bitcoin. So we could put out value in Bitcoin with Peter Dunworth, or we could be Bitcoin to reach 20 billion a coin with Peter Dunworth. People are going to want to know. Come on, is there logic to this, or are you just being ridiculous?
And that's a conservative way.
The 20 billion is conservative.
I'll give you the two. And so we can basically work through
conservative one.
How that looks.
What's the bullish one?
It's a number you just can't figure out, literally. And this is where, like, if I look at, say, who's had the best crack at valuing Bitcoin, I look at it from a consciousness perspective. And I think our friend Jeff Booth, probably the highest of, and everyone does, right? He says you can't value Bitcoin from within a system, you can't value the new paradigm. And I agree wholeheartedly with that. And then we have Knut with everything divided by 21 million. And I agree with both of those. And sadly, I'm stuck in this, financial situation where we are now that, my day-to-day is basically helping people make smart choices with their money. So
give the background just so people know who you are, what you do, the day-to-day work.
Great. So for the last 25 years, I've been in and around finance. Started off with BT Funds Management, which was a very successful funds management business. Left that to go into credit and mortgage broking. So spent a decade in credit and mortgages, understanding and assessing risk and mitigating it. Pre-GFC, I was advised by one of my dad's great mates and advisor who happened to be a chairman of one of our biggest banks here. Peter, you're on the wrong side of the balance sheet. You need to get back to the other side. There's going to be a big blow up in debt. So moved back to the advice space. And for the last, say, 15 years, been working on financial advice. Now, that covers a whole range of things, but in short, it helps people make smart choices with their money around property, stocks, bonds, and ensures and has a background in making sure that all the structures are set up correctly so that you don't lose it. And so I come at this with, close to 3 decades in and around finance. So it's not, there is rationale. Like, I've spent a lot of time, and this is the problem that I think, discussing Bitcoin with traditional finance has a huge sort of problem with. Firstly, there is the first lesson we get when we're children are, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah.
So you hear that and you think Bitcoin, it's going to be worth X, Y, or Z, and it's like, little red flag, I've already dismissed it. I don't need to listen to anymore because my dad told me when I was 4 that too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah.
Or there's no such thing as a free lunch. So, and traditional measurement in finance terms typically revolves around the risk-free rate, which is typically the 10-year in the US. And so that sets basically the risk-free rate of the world. And then every other financial instrument is effectively a derivative of that, or rated or valued based on that. And the problem with Bitcoin is when you come from it from a framework perspective is you don't have the ability to use those tools because there's no risk-free rate with Bitcoin.
Nope.
You don't get a free lunch with Bitcoin. There's no interest rate, so there's no carry. So how do you apply traditional finance metrics to this thing that most people like to call a pet rock? And it doesn't compute in people's heads. So there are 2 valuation frameworks that I go through. The first is basically about as simple as I can get, that if you believe Bitcoin is the best form of money, we're going to get to a point where people will no longer accept anything else other than Bitcoin for their goods and services. And so that will be the required payment. Now, there may be people listening to this who think there's no way we're going to get to that.
Well, the people are already there with that. Mm-hmm. So Max Hillebrand was RB. He openly said he lives on a Bitcoin standard, like fully. He's fully in. And I don't know what that means realistically for day-to-day living, because sometimes you need fiat. Yeah. And I said, why? And he said, well, every 4 years you say to yourself, I wish I'd bought more Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So like, why put yourself in that position? Just always be in Bitcoin. And you know what? I'm not far off it.
Yeah. And that's probably a function of time and understanding.
And I love a gamble.
Yeah.
Did Mikey get you into Bitcoin?
Absolutely.
It was him.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
He told me to buy when it was $3. And I went, that'll never work. You're a fool.
$3.
Not a day goes by that I don't sit there and go, damn, maybe I should have just bought $1,000 worth. So
Yeah, you'd have more Bitcoin than
Most
99%
people.
of people. Yeah.
Yeah.
$1,000 worth at $3. You'd have three. Fuck me.
But you know what Michael's like? He's so softly spoken. I said, I work in finance. I know what money is, blah, blah, blah. And could run through the list of things why I told him it'd never work. And rather than him pushing me on it, he just said, okay.
He'd have probably said it in a way that sounded like it was a joke.
Yeah.
The big grin on his face.
No, he was sincere, but, I just didn't know and there weren't the resources. And, where were you? You should have been podcasting so I could have learnt back in 2011.
Listen, I bought my first Bitcoin at £80 and it was a medium of exchange for me. I used it quite regularly. And I wish I'd have bought £10,000 worth at that point, and I didn't.
And that's the learning, right? You just wish you'd get there.
Do you know what the thing is? I've got a view on this. Bitcoin always seems expensive.
Yes.
At every single price you buy it, it seems expensive. So when I first bought it at £80, and I was explaining this digital money, you can use it to buy some things on the internet. I was like, £80? I was like, it seems expensive. Even though I was using it straight away, I didn't think I'd, and then when I got back in and it was like £600, I was like, God, this is expensive because it was 80. And now it's like £20,000. It seems expensive. There's never a time. Have you ever bought Bitcoin, Danny, and thought, that's cheap?
I mean, when you get like the 50% drawdown, you think, okay, Bitcoin's on sale. Okay. But no, I get the point.
Even then, does it seem cheap?
No.
Yeah. So when people they're up on Twitter and they're like, yo, Bitcoin's on sale, Bitcoin's cheap. It's like, none of you are thinking that. And probably most of you are tweeting that. I bet you haven't fucking bought any today. You're just saying that.
Yeah.
You're just parroting the shit.
So back to the valuation framework.
Sorry.
This is where my hope in putting these numbers together is to put a logical framework around it. Most importantly, to help people understand that although it's really expensive today, in terms in the future, it is chronically undervalued and people really have no idea how valuable this thing's going to be into the future. So thinking about this as the best form of money, very simply, the first valuation framework is simple in that there's $6.3 trillion worth of global trade that happens on a daily basis. And if you divide 6.3 trillion by the 900 Bitcoin that are minted on the day, you get to $7 billion a coin. Now, that's assuming that we've got a functioning credit market and stable coin attached to it, that you don't have to sell your Bitcoin. You just do what wealthy families do all over the world, whether it's using, property as collateral to go and borrow from the bank, or you use your shares as collateral to borrow from the investment banks. Look at Jeff Bezos. Yes, he sold some down recently, but on that ascension, he never sold any because he was basically using a margin facility provided by the bank to just take some out. Now, if we get
we have that with Bitcoin, essentially.
Correct. And this is where Bitcoin's the most undervalued collateral in the world right now. And once people understand that Bitcoin's the best form of collateral we've ever seen, then that gets used for borrowing. So to those people out there who think that, Bitcoin's going to ruin debt markets and the rest of it, I agree. But in the short term, what's going to happen is it is going to explode debt markets up dramatically. And when you think about it, we've got, to give you an example of this, we've got two competing thoughts on Bitcoin at the moment, in that one's currency in the form of Bukele, that's his argument, and he says it's currency. And then you've got Saylor, who says it's property, both of which are correct. But when you take your property to the bank and borrow on that, that bank cannot rehypothecate that 20 times to lend it out to monetize it. However, with it as currency, that goes on their balance sheet. That is now back to one of their, capital that solves their capital adequacy requirements, and they can 20x leverage that. So they can then basically, on a $10 million worth of Bitcoin, they can lend out $200 million worth of home loans on the back of it. They can make circa $4 million, still lend you $1 million, and then actually pay you an interest rate on that borrowing.
Only if in a
they
world
rehypothecate.
Only in a world where there is a fiat currency that sits alongside it.
Correct.
They can't do that if there is only Bitcoin.
Correct. And so this is where, in that hyper-Bitcoinization, we're going to have that little hump along the way where everyone will do that, and then everyone will come to the realization that we don't want to accept fiat for our time, for our energy, for our goods and services that we're doing, in the same way that, in Britain, there's no way on earth you'd accept a Venezuelan bolivar for any good that you're selling over there, or in Australia, we wouldn't accept, what is it, a Zimbabwe rand or whatever they call it. At some point in time, people will figure out, I'm not going to accept any of this arbitrary stuff that can be inflated or deflated, or, there's no, it's completely subjective. I want the objective money. I want the firm money that can't be messed with. And so I'll take payment in that. So that's how we get to, in my eyes, I think it's a $7 billion Bitcoin today. So if you look at fair market value, when you get to buy it for 25 grand US, well, it's not expensive. I think it's relatively cheap.
Well, mate, I'll sell you one for $5 billion today.
I'm sure there's a government out there silly enough to do it. Do you accept Venezuelan bolivar?
Yeah, I mean, if I can get rid of it quickly.
What about that Lebanese? What are they working with? Because it's
that's I'm for people. I don't know. Will this go out before I get to Lebanon?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be a fascinating story in itself. Yeah. In that the entire economy is rebuilding itself outside of government.
Yeah,
I cannot wait to go and find out how that's happening. But this is where I think Unchained are ahead of everyone. Unchained Capital.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I know them well.
What's their loan rate at the moment? It's high, but
it's 14%.
Yeah,
last time I checked.
But you hold one of the keys.
Correct.
So they can't rehypothecate. They can't fuck about with it.
Correct.
So they are just using it purely as collateral.
Yep.
And I think that's the model we're trying to get to. And yes, you're going to have to pay higher interest rates.
Yeah. So
but there should be a cost of capital.
Well, that is exactly right. And this is where, say, I've had experience with Unchained and I love those guys and think they're phenomenal. But that's using Bitcoin as a property. And you look at alternate lending solutions in the Bitcoin space that, if I look at the other end of the spectrum, you've got Unchained at 14% and you've got Abra at 0% if you borrow less than 15%.
Yeah, it depends on your
LVR.
Yeah, LVR.
Loan to value ratio.
Yeah. Because I had a look at theirs once and I was like, it's 0%. I was like, well, hold on. I have to leave a lot of Bitcoin with them.
Correct. And you understand counterparty risk. They're basically taking that, they're lending it out, they're making a margin on it, and that's why that happens. And so one thing I talk about with clients quite a lot is that you think, or I think basically in time, Bitcoin, you'll be paid to borrow money from the banks, because Abra is proof that that is the way it's going. Abra can't rehypothecate like 20x like the banks can, but the banks could. So why wouldn't they give you a little bit of the upside of the interest margin that they'd make?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think people are fully prepared for this new paradigm.
No.
And I think we as Bitcoiners are going to be ahead of the game.
Yeah.
Because the only way now, like after the experiences of the likes of BlockFi, not that it was me it affected my listeners. Seeing people go through that kind of experience, I now know from myself and my Bitcoin, for me to take it out of my cold storage and put it somewhere else, I'm going to be very careful. Now, Unchained, I trust implicitly because they're a proper Bitcoin company, proper people. Yeah. And I know my Bitcoin is there. I've got my key. I can see it. I can protect it. And I'm like, okay, that is a scenario now that will build trust for me. Yeah. None of these other ones I have any. Would I have the trust? I guess the trust is scaled, right?
Correct.
There's a spectrum of trust. Yeah.
And this is where I went through the same process you did. That if I'm ever going to borrow money on my Bitcoin, I would look to a service like Unchained. Why is that? And when I discussed this with clients, I said, hey, I can get it for 0 if I do a wrap Bitcoin, or 1.5% with wrap Bitcoin on MakerDAO, and like all sorts of just bullshit chicanery, right? Thank you. And then you can get Celsius at 8%, BlockFi at 8%. And I told clients at the time it was 12%. I said, I borrowed from Unchained at 12. Now, most people were like, why would you do that? And I'm like, well, think about it from a risk management perspective. I've got one of the 3 keys. I can see what's in there at all times.
Is it one of 3 or one of 2?
No, I hold one of 3 in the Unchained setup. So I am literally, and I've got full view of what's happening in that vault. So I know they're not rehypothecating. The only concern I need to manage or mitigate is a spike down in price where they liquidate me. That's another concern. So, I have very conservative LVR ratios, but most clients couldn't comprehend why I'd go and pay 12% v 1%. I'm like, you don't understand counterparty risk.
You ended up paying 100% with those other services.
Thank you. Exactly.
Worse. because you're still liable for your loan as well.
Yes. A horrible situation to be in.
Yeah.
So,
But this is the weird world we've been conditioned to with very low interest rates. So even though interest rates in the UK are 6.5%, I was discussing with Danny, interest rate I've got on my house in a year and a half, I'm going to go onto a variable rate if I don't get a new one negotiated. Yeah, my mortgage will essentially double.
Yeah.
When that happens. But actually, these are the interest rates we should be having. We shouldn't be conditioned to 1% or 0% interest rates because if there's no cost to capital, it skews markets.
Correct. All of a sudden, there's an incentive to borrow and there's no incentive to save. And if you want to build a capitalistic market, it's imperative you have the incentive to save. And this is the major problem with the incentives that we've got in our financial system now. You are highly incentivized to take risk and borrow as hard as you can, and you're probably penalised for saving. And this is where, another sort of thing that Bitcoin totally breaks is for the first time, in at least the last sort of 15 to 20 years, you are probably 40 years, you are highly incentivized to save as opposed to borrow.
Yes.
And it completely changes things.
Well, even now, even with the higher interest rates where you would think, well, if I leave some money in the bank now, I am incentivized to save because, I'm getting I remember my interest rate with Revolut, I was when I first got with them, something like 0.1% or 0.01%. I was like, there's fucking no point. But there are now decent interest rates out there.
Yeah.
The problem is the incentive isn't to save because you're getting hit by inflation.
Correct.
So, all right, I might be getting I don't know, have a look at something like Lloyd's or NatWest, what they're offering on interest rates now. I mean, it's all well and good getting 4 or 5% interest rate with your savings, but if you've got 10% inflation, there's still no incentive to save.
Correct. Negative real rates.
Yeah. So, where do you put your money?
Yeah, 5%.
5%. Okay. And where's inflation in the UK?
6.3 or something.
Oh, is it down? Okay.
But still, you're losing to inflation.
Well, the 6.3 is the lowest they can get it to.
Yeah. 6.8, sorry.
Yeah. And so this is what I've been talking to my son about because he's now working, earning money, and I've been saying to him, just put a little bit by each month. Just put it in Bitcoin, just a little bit every month. That's where you want to put it. Yeah. There's no point putting it in the bank.
Yeah.
Because like I say, because the yeah. So what we're basically saying is Bitcoin is almost forcing markets to get back into the shape they should be in.
Correct. And it's funny, it's unwieldy. It will not bend at anyone's whim or will. Bitcoin will just keep marching on forward. And all of a sudden, what I'm looking at from a financial perspective is that markets are going to form around this thing that just doesn't move. It cannot be bent, cannot be broken. And touch wood, hope not. I'm not the technical guy, but that's what I see.
When did it click for you?
It's a slow progress. So it has started with, okay, well, this thing, isn't a scam and isn't a Ponzi and can't be broken. And, you just build conviction over time. I think there's no shortcuts. I wish I had, the orange pill literally to give someone to understand, all of the learnings I've been through. But sadly, it's a choose your own adventure with Bitcoin to choose how fast or how slow you want to learn about it. But I think everyone will learn about it in time, and you're highly incentivized to learn about it as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Can it be simple enough to sort of divide global trade by the number of Bitcoin produced every day? Because then it's just exponential and becomes worth infinity at some point.
Correct. So I think it can if you've got a functioning credit market and stablecoin on it. Yes, literally. Because over time, coins will get lost and coins will move to the people who have the biggest stack, like a game of poker, right? That's what happens in poker. You've got a big stack. It's highly likely that you can push around the others and you can end up with all of it. That's kind of what happens, I think.
Michael Saylor.
Yeah. You sort of look at the other markets, though, and say the other framework for valuing Bitcoin, which I think is even more out there, which actually comes with a lot more sense, is if you look at the functions of money, store of value, mean of exchange, unit of account, and you apply the technological improvements that Bitcoin brings or the tech innovations that Bitcoin has to those three functions, I look at the four key functions are absolute digital scarcity. We've talked about that to no end. Seizure resistance, we all know what that is. You can't seize it. Censorship resistant is a big deal too. And then the final one, which probably doesn't get much credit, but sort of credit Darren Feinstein for talking about this, is the immutable ledger supply and issuance. This is a big deal because it's accounting. No one wants to talk about it because it is dead boring, but this has the biggest impact on price and value. So if you look at those 4 functions of tech innovation and how they apply to the functions of money, absolute digital scarcity is a big improvement on store of value, what we've got with gold. That's a $10 trillion market cap. When you cap or include seizure resistance to that, and what happened with the Russian foreign reserves, 500 billion captured overnight. I bet Putin had his time again so he could just dump it all into Bitcoin, and then it's the only asset that can't be touched. So it improves the function of store of value. If you look at mean of exchange, and this is where I don't get into the debate about mean of exchange, I don't think it's a big deal right now while we can transfer fiat to it, but it will become a big deal if we can't. But mean of exchange is a $100 trillion market, maxed out or dominated by the US dollar. But censorship resistance is a big deal and a big improvement on that US dollar. And being able to transfer digitally, globally in real-time settlement is a big deal that no one really is aware of. But the sleeping giant in those functions of money, which I think holds the majority of the value, is the unit of account. And by my reckoning, unit of account is close to a $2,000 trillion market, which dwarfs mean of exchange and unit of account. And that market is basically calculated by or looked after by a double entry ledger system, which hasn't evolved since the Renaissance. Now we have a triple entry ledger system. That's the first immutable ledger that we've ever seen. This is a huge accounting upgrade that when people realise that we're getting hoodwinked at everywhere in life, they realise, hang on, there's one thing that we can trust or rely on more so than anything else. This is an immutable ledger coupled with immutable supply and issuance. All of a sudden, that's a huge upgrade on our unit of account. Now, this is where it gets really silly from a numbers perspective, because Bitcoin represents what I call the first triple point asset. So it's the first asset that's ever been invented that is in all 3 states at the one time. So we've had gold for store of value, and that's gold. It never really, once fiat was invented, it never really crossed into mean of exchange. Once double entry ledger systems were created, that never went into mean of exchange. So they've all been isolated in silos. But with the tech innovations that have happened, what we've now got is we've got Bitcoin is the best store of value. It's better than gold. We now have Bitcoin as the best mean of exchange. It's better than the US dollar. And we have Bitcoin as the best unit of account, which is better than our existing unit of account that we work with. So I look at this and think, just purely from an economics perspective, we now have 3 functions of money competing for one use case. So it's like a free-for-all. And if you've ever been to a property auction, you'll see that if there's no one bidding on a property, that the property passes in for what the reserve is. But when you have 8 billion people competing for each of those 3 use cases personally for one single asset with only 21 million units, this is going to be a free-for-all like we've never seen. So this is where I think it becomes the first exponential asset when the broader population understands what that is. Because in my thinking, where I think we've been limited in thinking about the value or potential value of Bitcoin is people look at it and think if it's the best store of value mean of exchange unit of account, you add those numbers together to get the total addressable market for Bitcoin. But if it's the best at all 3 at the one time, you don't add those market caps together. You probably multiply them together. So you end up with a number that is too stupid to talk about.
Yet we still struggle to communicate this to the wider public.
Correct.
We still don't have anywhere near mass adoption. We have mass awareness.
No way.
We've had it for years. There's no scenario where you meet somebody and you mention the word Bitcoin. They're like, well, what is that? I've never heard of that. Everyone's heard of it now.
Yeah.
Maybe some far out tribes in South American Brazilian rainforest haven't heard of it yet. But pretty much anywhere I travel in the world with this job, and I've been to 50, what did we count it last night? 52 countries. Every single time they've heard of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I don't ever meet anyone now who says, I've not heard of Bitcoin. But of the percentage of the heard of it that then understand it and then own it, is tiny.
Correct.
It's tiny. You cannot get people to cross into becoming a Bitcoiner.
Correct. It's really hard.
It's hard.
Yeah.
And I think it's part of it's kind of chicken and egg. Come for the game, stay for the revolution, that traditional meme. And yeah, that does happen. And yeah, most people, when they're looking at my friends and they say to me, is like, now a good time to buy, the first thing on their mind is it going to go up? Not defensive.
Yeah.
Not long-term. I mean, you help people with asset planning, but not long-term planning. No. I tell them the same. I'm like, no, it's not a good time to buy it. Yeah. It's a good time to learn about it.
Yeah.
And then it's always a good time to buy it.
It's smart because I think we have, at this point in time, a very small microcosm of society understands Bitcoin. And I would put that at less than 0.1%.
Yeah.
And where I spend a lot of my time is in normie land, not in Bitcoin land. And I look at the services that are offered at this point in time. They don't service normie land. They service Bitcoiners. It's 0.1% that's being looked after. And as unpopular as this opinion is, I think there needs to be a broad range of services that can appeal to the masses if we want to get them in. So that's where I look at and spend my time. And a lot of my day-to-day now is literally working on a business called the Bitcoin Advisor to get collaborative custody up and running, to move them into collaborative custody. It doesn't appease the 0.1% who are here already with the not your keys, not your coins. But clients get a 2 or 3 multi-sig where, say, Unchained hold a key, the client holds a key, it's their account, and we hold a default backup key for them. So my promise to the clients is they can walk out the door with zero Bitcoin knowledge. They can totally muck up everything we do for them, and we can still recover their coins.
You've got growing interest and you've got a growing level of inquiry into Bitcoin.
Yeah.
What's their starting point? Why are they asking about Bitcoin?
I think the majority of my calls are based on greed.
Okay.
Like I want to get rich.
Yeah.
And if I look at it from a psychological perspective, that's our primary driver, greed and fear. Our most core essence, that's fundamentally the driver. Now, because we're here for a longer time, we'd like to dress it up that we're here for the revolution, but we would never have been for the revolution if we didn't come for the gains.
Yeah, of course.
So that's where I think everyone starts. And this is where, probably to the conversation we were joking about before, the clickbaity title, this is where, to get people in and have a look at it and think, well, does that logic work out? Do I think that's something I can get behind? Hopefully people can realise that from a Bitcoin perspective, there's more gains in front of us than there are behind us, and they don't need to waste their time on altcoins because there is a much higher probability of this happening than there is of them choosing the one in the 50,000 token that goes up 1,000% in 2 days.
Well, Lola, is it Lola Keats?
Leets.
Lola Leets. She said she's the other way around, didn't she? She came for the revolution.
Yeah, but she'd be in the tiny fraction of the people that actually go that way around.
We think about this a lot. We talk about this a lot. I'm kind of like, I need to break free of this Bitcoiners talking to Bitcoiners about Bitcoin.
Yeah.
All patting each other on the back. We got this right. Yeah, we're right. Yeah. Bitcoin's going to fix everything. It's kind of like, I need to widen that net now.
Well, you do the best job out of any one of that, I think.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to say.
And you cop a lot of shit for it too.
I do.
But I think one of the great initiatives that you took, which probably copped some unnecessary heat on, is trying to bring progressives into Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Your work with Jason Mayer was excellent.
Thank you.
Troy
Cross, yeah.
Amazing Bitcoiner. And like, Bitcoin's for everyone. So we should be, finding out what people want and then trying to bring them into the pie or into the circle.
Bitcoin's for anyone, not everyone.
Good
so
point.
Mr. Hoddle would say, would he?
Nice.
When I said Bitcoin's for everyone, I said, no, it's for anyone. I think that's correct.
Yeah. Touche, yeah.
Yeah. Well, listen, that was just what makes sense. If you look at the, I don't know, Hive.com top 100 Bitcoiners, a lot of them are going to have a American Republican or Libertarian bent to them. And naturally they're going to communicate what's important to them and what's important in their world. But that's a fraction of the world. And a large a percentage of the world is from the left. And even larger is from the left of US Republicans. Yeah. And so, it makes sense that if we want to expand Bitcoin and get Bitcoin into more people's thought process as well as their investment portfolio or consciousness, that you have to meet them where they're at. And and I think it was a good decision for us. Like commercially, it was a good decision as a podcast.
Did it work out that way?
You can never truly know. You can never actually truly know, has this been good or bad for us in terms of, say, downloads. Yeah. And, look, we don't hunt downloads. We make plenty of shows that we know, won't do well. But I think if you think more like Harry says, like everything's good for Bitcoin, doing it is good for Bitcoin. I think there is a progressive movement in Bitcoin that's been growing. I think it would have happened without us. We definitely don't want to claim any credit for it. Jason would have written his book without us.
Sure.
Troy would have been successful without us. There's no world where we think, we did this. We just at the same time happy to support a more balanced conversation. Yeah. But there is now this book by Jason, and he's done exceptionally well. I'm so fucking proud of him. And that book is getting in people's hands. And it is a different book to show people. You can't just give everyone the Bitcoin standard, or you can't send everyone to certain podcasts. We actually, the interesting thing is like when people do give us shit, I'm always like, stop listening. No, because there's so many podcasts out there and they're brilliant. Like you can listen to Breedlove, you can listen to us or Marty or Matt Odell or Natalie Brunel, or there's so many. Find the one you like. Yeah. Like if you don't like one, just stop fucking listening to it. Just go, or if you disagree but you appreciate it, fine. But if you don't, stop fucking listening. Yeah. Like if you got two scarce assets as well, Bitcoin on time. Why are you wasting time listening to podcasts you don't like? Stop complaining, or make the one that you think should exist. And so, we think that's been good. I think our show will evolve beyond. There will be a next level, which will be, we've talked to everyone in Bitcoin, is to bring more people from wider circle. Shows that do interestingly very well. Eric Weinstein, Michael Malice, both do exceptionally well. And you wouldn't call them Bitcoiners. They're interested, but the majority of the interviews they will do in the world will not be about Bitcoin. They'll be about other topics. Yeah. I think we've got to get more of these people into Bitcoin. Yeah. More conversations about that.
With great power comes great responsibility, Pete. You're responsible for widening the circle.
Do you know where the power is? The power is there.
I don't know if that's true.
Danny holds all the power. He picks the guests. He tells me who we have on. I'm just basically Danny's puppet.
Danny doing a great job.
Thank you.
Danny's about to do his first interview.
Yeah, I am.
Who's the guest?
He's going on a podcast as a guest.
Yeah, going on Blue Collar Bitcoin.
Nice. I love those boys. They seem like a good bunch of fellas.
A bit nervous.
Yeah. And
a bit nervous, please.
We're doing our conference next April in the UK. We'd love you to come if you can. Danny's probably going to do one on stage interviews.
I'm really looking forward to that. I think it's going to be, we're going to try and do like maybe up to, what, can we say how many people we're going for?
Yeah.
Maybe between like 600 and 1,000 people event.
Oh, wow.
Well, so 1,000 would be great, but obviously we have to sell that. It's hard. Selling tickets is hard.
Is your ground is that big enough to look after 1,000 people? 1,000 Bitcoiners?
Well,
that's a good point.
You can have 1,500 around a pitch.
Okay.
So, look, if we could, that would be amazing. The conference itself on the Friday, the venue, I think, seats 800. Yeah. And so I think we can go up to 1,000 people.
With some standing.
Yeah, and some fire safety rules broken. Nice. But, that's our goal for that. I think you and Michael should come over for it. But, we're conference Friday, football Saturday.
Nice.
We're going to be announcing it. When are we announcing it? Next week or two? Week or so? We'll tell you all the confirmed guests afterwards. Do you think we can hint, or should we save it?
I just drop one.
This
will be going out like a couple of days before we announce it anyway.
Nah, let's save
saving it.
Let's save it. We'll tell you afterwards. But it's going to be, we think it'll be good. It's different. It's not going to have Bitcoin in the title of the conference by design.
Yep.
It will have conversations that aren't about it's you say all these societal issues.
Yeah,
we kind of just want to bring them all together, whether it's education, whether it's media, whether it's social media, whether it's money. I think there's a Bitcoin lens to all of them.
Yes.
And so that's essentially what we're going to try and do with our conference. I can tell you what it's called.
Do tell.
It's called Cheat Code.
Nice.
Yeah. And so that will be in Bedford, April the 12th next year. Come along if you can.
April the 12th.
Yeah, April the 12th next year, followed by Real Bedford against Potting United on the Saturday. Why are you laughing?
It's just the names are ridiculous.
Potting United. Do you think custody is a barrier for people to get into Bitcoin?
Yes, to do it properly. And my concern is that if it's not done properly, I don't want to see people losing coins, because that creates a despondent person who then kind of becomes a once coiner. And there's only thing worse than a no coiner, and that's a once coiner, because they're the saltiest. They're the saltiest of no coiners.
But it makes Bitcoin scarcer.
That's true, but people put in hard work and money. I want to see them benefit from it. So,
is it a barrier to the people that you're dealing with, because you're probably dealing with higher net worth individuals who are going to be buying a lot of Bitcoin, as opposed to Joe Normal on the street? Because I don't find people, when they come to me and ask me about buying Bitcoin, custody isn't even something they're thinking.
They haven't
about.
thought of.
They haven't thought about it. They don't know about wallets. They don't know about multi-sig. They don't know about none of that's on their mind.
No.
But I could see in a scenario, if you're thinking of buying, say, $10 million of Bitcoin, $1 million of Bitcoin, you can do a lot of research first, and then you're going to find out about custody.
Yeah.
And you're going to be thinking, shit, how do I do this?
That's the hard part, because the not your keys, not your coins is a very important message, which I agree wholeheartedly with. But to take from someone from zero to understanding what a not your keys, not your coins is, and having it on a single sig wallet, I think is terrifying, and it puts the majority of people off to start with. And so I think collaborative custody, and there's a lot of people working on this now, and we use Unchained with our collaborative custody. It's like when you go bowling and you put up the rails, the bumper rails.
Nope, don't need it.
Well, some people do, and this is where. Probably, actually, it's wild. I can't tell you the last time I bowled, but this is where I think collaborative custody puts up bumpers for people.
Yeah, I get
and
it.
rather than bowling a gutter ball and getting zero, you can work someone through that process in the hope that they graduate to not your keys, not your coins from 100%.
So on the collaborative, who holds the keys?
A software provider. So I love Unchained.
Yeah,
we do a lot of work with Unchained. Know that team relatively well. So refer a lot of clients there. The client holds a key, and then we hold a default backup key for them.
So how do they get rugged? Is it you and Unchained?
Yeah, that'd be very difficult for us to do that.
Yeah.
Because we don't have access to their account. We don't have the 2FA.
So you're essentially holding one for them.
I don't look like a lot of people.
So no, but you're essentially you're holding a backup key so they don't lose two. So the max they can lose is one, and you can recover for them.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so
you're the insurance policy.
Correct. And this is where, some of the things from a personal point of view we've dealt with over the last 7 years in doing this is, like, we've been through 3 probates now where clients have passed away.
Okay.
And, if you're running a single sig, you need to have a partner or know that your partner knows how to recover that. And this is where a recent conversation with VJ, the early Bitcoiners have typically come from an engineering background who over-optimize for themselves, and they have their perfect security. Nothing better for them. But if they die, trying to recover that could potentially be a huge problem for their partner. And this is where, in the work I do and see, one of the major benefits is that typically their partners aren't aware of anything, and trying to educate a partner on how to use a hardware device is just eyes glaze over. You may as well be talking about accounting, right? No one's interested in that. So having a third party, a person they can see at the end of the line that, okay, if something happens, you call this person, they call that person, and together we can recover things. We've done that, haven't lost a Bitcoin yet. So we've been through 3 probates, and I'm proud to say we haven't lost a Bitcoin yet, which is...
How do you confirm the death?
They just aren't there anymore.
Yeah, no.
Pulse? Death certificate?
Daddy's on the phone. Hi, Peter. Pete's not here anymore. Like, there has to be a way to confirm.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
So typically we've got relationships with all our clients. So, we don't know them in isolation.
You don't have a picture of,
Yeah, send a picture that's quite morbid, isn't it? Check a pulse.
God, you could use AI for that now. Yeah.
On a serious note, notarized death certificate is typically how the first function gets done. Then you need a notarized will. You need notarized ID of the executor and then notarized ID of the beneficiary. So there's a process to go through if the partner doesn't have access to the key. So
yeah. I know that's a weakness I bet it's a weakness in your setup. It's a
100%.
weakness in my setup is I've not properly death planned. I kind of have.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say what I've done. Like I've left a couple of secrets with a couple of people that they know they can do something with it, but they don't know what, and they'll figure it out.
Yeah.
But I've definitely not solved it in the way I should have solved it.
You know what's interesting, and this is where I spend a lot of my time with clients, and this is that with so I focus on risk mitigation, right?
Yeah.
Preserving coins. And this is an awful topic to think about, but the number one risk to coins is obviously losing it from a numbers perspective. Secondly, which I don't think we've really got much insight onto at the moment, but the second way you lose Bitcoin is through divorce. So the one you sleep next to. That's where the majority of Bitcoin gets lost. And with estate planning and the rest of it, you basically work through and can put in structures in place to help avoid those sorts of things happening.
Why were you side-eyeing me then?
I'm just saying.
I was actually thinking on the flight down to Sydney, I think with me sat next to my wife, if that plane went down, I think my Bitcoin's gone forever. I think she's one of the keys to recover the Bitcoin, and without her, I don't think anyone else, like whoever else, my parents or whoever else, could get access to it.
Have I shared secrets with you for mine?
I don't think we should say for OPSEC reasons.
Well, no, because I think the secrets I was sharing, no one can do anything with it.
No one can do anything with mine.
Like the way I've shared secrets, like I have to die.
Yeah.
And then they have to go through the process and go, fuck, how do we figure this out? Well, Pete said this. Yeah. Right, we use that there. But like I almost want to take it out of human hands.
Yeah. Well, this is where
lawyer hands would be better.
Well, this is where I think a lot of the innovations happening in multi-sig and time locking, mini-script, are going to be wildly valuable to this moving forward. Like you'll be able to set up a whole host of functions. And this is where I spend a lot of time looking at this, that my job is going to get so much better, so much easier because of all of the functionality that can be functioned in. So you won't have to worry about that. You won't have to trust anyone. And this is the beauty of Bitcoin and the programmability of it. So
that divorce stuff's interesting because obviously I am divorced and I've been through it and it's brutal and, expensive. And, I'm not in a place where I hold any resentment to my ex-wife, what she got, but it was a brutal process of resetting my finances. Yeah. And, she deserves everything she got. She bore me 2 kids, yada, yada. But I went on a date recently and the girl was asking obvious questions like, would you ever get married again? I was like, no. And she said, why? And I said, well, there's no prenups in the UK. So if I get
Same here.
Yeah. So if I get divorced, half of everything I have would go to you, which means my kids get a quarter each, which means you end up with more than my kids. Yeah. I'm just not going to get married. And she was disappointed. She was like, well, but that's so sad that you would go into a marriage worrying about divorce. And I was like, no, that's rational.
I'm a Bitcoiner with a long term.
Yeah, no, it's rational. And I'm never going to put myself in a situation where I halve my kids' inheritance, which can be halved for a day of marriage. It can be halved for.
Yeah.
And so there's no incentive to get married now.
In Australia, it's worse than that.
Okay.
It's 6 months living with someone in a 6-month relationship.
What?
Similar in the UK. In the UK, if you're in a relationship where like you talk about your future together and you plan for your future together and maybe you're the breadwinner and she stays home, like if you have that set, you don't even have to be married. You just have to be in a long-term relationship. And
de facto relationship.
I don't think that's true.
It's definitely true.
100% in Australia.
I'm still not sure that's true.
So this is where I think asset protection, estate planning hold a critical component for Bitcoiners moving forward, that there's a sophistication that comes with, managing great wealth that I think every Bitcoiner will come to that stage. And it's important to have those discussions sooner rather than later, because the later you do it, the more expensive it becomes. So,
well, the sad thing is I actually do want to get married again.
Yeah.
I'd love to meet a nice girl.
But you don't want to pay 50% of your net assets for it, right?
It's not that I don't want to pay 50%. I don't want to take away from my children. It's a bit like taxation. I don't mind paying some tax.
Yeah.
I think 50% is too high. I think 15% sounds about reasonable. I'm okay with that. It's like, I believe you go into a marriage. I'm not in a scenario where I think you should get nothing, especially in a scenario where somebody like has children and gives
course.
up a career.
Yep.
You know, when you build it, like I know if I get into another relationship, I just know realistically the amount I work, the amount of things I'm doing, there will whoever I'm with will probably end up having more of a responsibility on the house kind of thing. So I'd probably lean on that person to just deal with stuff like that. So that person is sacrificing time they could be working, earning to build the home for you. I think there is a fair way of dealing with that in the future, but I don't think it's a 50%.
Yeah. And this is where, maybe the incentives aren't aligned to a productive society again.
That word incentives keeps coming up,
doesn't it?
Well, I think the government incentives, the way they create divorce law is to do everything they can to ensure somebody takes less from the state, not for what's fair.
That's actually a very good point, because typically if you're, some of the things we've seen here, if you're in a relationship and you're a partner who's working, we've had a number of experiences where, the partner who's not working, typically might be the wife, ends up not in a 50-50 situation. They take 70% of the assets.
Yeah.
So to your point, they don't want to be reliant on the state. So maybe that's one of the outcomes that comes with taking 70% of the family assets.
I think that's what happened with my house. I think I lost 70% on the house.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just, again, it's another thing that just needs rethinking to be like realistic and fair. There almost needs to be like a set of rules which you arbitrate around. Like 70%, if the assets between you are, say, 100 grand, sounds about fair. If you had 100 million, it might not be so fair.
I think Eddie Murphy did a skit on this a long time
Did
ago.
he?
Yeah.
We'll have to dig that one out.
It's definitely not for public consumption here.
Did you find it?
No, I can't find it.
I still think you're wrong.
We'll ask it tonight.
The reason I think you're wrong is I'm pretty sure the rules are such that if you say bought a house together and you separate, it's equally split. But if you never get married, when you go into a divorce settlement, and if it goes to the courts, the time period, they consider the relationship, not the length of the marriage. So say you were married for 10 years, they don't go in and say, okay, they were together 10 years, how do we arbitrate this? They then say, how long were you together? Because if you were together 20 years before you got married, they'd consider you 30 years.
Yeah.
But if you never got married, it's 0.
Yeah.
They only look at the time if there's been a marriage. I'm almost certain. I think you're wrong.
We have some very penal things in Australia that you don't even need to be married. There's no time limit on it. You can just be in a relationship under the superannuation, which is our pension system here. You just need to be in a relationship and you can lose half of your superannuation or pension balance.
But is there a certain period? Like
no.
What, so you go on one day?
No time limit, literally one day.
You go on one day?
And the person's dead. They can't even argue, oh, I wasn't in a relationship with you.
Jesus Christ, one day.
Yeah.
God, I just put my Tinder on while I was here. I'm going to turn it back off. I'm not going to any dates while I'm here. Peter, anywhere you want to send people to go look? What do you want to go and have a look at?
Maybe the website, if anyone's interested in collaborative custody, wants help with that. We've got a host of resources there. We'd love to look after anyone. And that is thebitcoinadvisor.com with an ER. And I'm on Twitter with Peter BTC Advisor. So
we will share that in the show notes. And we're out to dinner tomorrow night?
Tomorrow night.
Mikey's in town?
He sure is. He's looking for
Does he live near here? I don't want to
probably
tell
about 15 minutes.
Oh,
that
really?
way. Yep.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing him as well. Yeah, look forward to it. Thanks for coming on, man. Really appreciate this. Great first show in Australia.
Appreciate it. A lot of fun, guys. Thank you.
Cheers.